Okay, this video we are going to be working with completing the square, just the basics. Okay, so steps to completing the square. B divided by 2 squared will find you your new c value. You're going to add c to both sides, and then you are going to simplify. Okay, so just practicing finding the c. Remember, our standard form of our quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so in my b divided by 2 squared, we're actually looking at that value in front of x. So to find my c, we're going to do 12 divided by 2 squared. It's always a 2 and a squared there. So 12 divided by 2 gets me 6. 6 squared gets me 36. Okay, so if I was rewriting my equation with my new c to make it where I can complete the square, which means it'll be a perfect square trinomial, that's what it would be. Okay, my next one here is -5, so -5 divided by 2 squared. -5 divided by 2 is -2.5, and that squared is going to get me 6.25. So to make this a perfect square trinomial, I got x squared minus 5x plus 6.25. My next one is 3, so 3 divided by 2 squared. 3 divided by 2 gets me 1.5. 1.5 squared is 2.25. So to make this a perfect square trinomial, I've got x squared plus 3x plus 2.25. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some. So I want to make my left side a perfect square trinomial. So first off, I need to find that new c value that will get me that. So we're going to get rid of this one because it's not a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to move them over and just work the left side. So my b is 8, so I do my 8 divided by 2 squared. 8 divided by 2 gets me 4. 4 squared gets me 16. That's my new c value that I'm going to add in. Okay, so I'm going to add it in, but if I change one side, I have to do it to the other side. Otherwise, my problem will change completely. Okay, so what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So now it is x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals -13 plus 16 is 3. Now I've got a perfect square trinomial. So I've got what multiplies to 16 adds to 8 is going to be 4 and 4. If I have the same thing written twice, I can write it with a squared. This is why I am completing the square. You are making a squared over there. Now we're going to solve like we did with the last one. So opposite of squaring is square rooting. So it will cancel. I've got plus or minus the square root of 3, and then all I have to do is subtract my 4. So I got x equals -4 plus or minus the square root of 3. So you got to get rid of your c value. Find your new c value, okay? The cheat in this is whatever you get right here, that 4, that will automatically be that number right there. Okay, so my next one here, we got to get rid of this 17 so I can find my new one. So we're going to add it over to the other side. My b is -2, so -2 divided by 2 squared. -2 divided by 2 is -1. That's what's going to be my perfect square. Okay, so that's what's going to go in my set of parentheses right here, is that -1. Okay, -1 squared is 1, so that's my c value that I have to add to both sides. So +1, +1. So I've got x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 18. I do the left side. So it multiplies to 1, adds to -2, and I said it's going to be whatever's in that set of parentheses, which is true. It's x minus 1, x minus 1, but I can rewrite it squared. Okay, opposite of squaring is square rooting. Square root of 18 I can simplify, so I've got 9 and 2, 3 and 3, so if I write them in radical jail, it's 3 times 3 times 2. We pair them up, one escapes, one dies, so it's going to be plus or minus 3 square root 2, and then I can add that 1. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus 3 square root 2. Okay, get rid of that c value, so we're going to add the 6. this is my b value, so I do 3 divided by 2 squared. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Okay, so that's actually what's going to be my set of parentheses. But if we're doing it the long way, 1.5 times 1.5, so I'm going to be adding 2.25 to both sides. So if I swing in here, 2.25 plus 2.25. So I've got x squared plus 3x plus 2.25 is equal to 8.25. So it multiplies to 2.25, but when I add it gets me 3 is going to be that number in the parentheses. So x plus 1.5, x plus 1.5 is equal to that 8.25. We can write it as a squared. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So I've got x, plus 1.5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 8.25, and then I just need to subtract that 1.5 over. So x is equal to negative 1.5 plus or minus the square root of 8.25. Okay, my next one here is a little different because that 2 right there. So let's move that 3 over. So I've got 2x squared plus 8x is equal to 3. Okay, I can't do my perfect square trinomial because I won't be able to get a perfect square with this 2. So to get rid of that 2, we're going to take him out by dividing him. So it's going to be sitting in the front. I've got x squared plus 4x now, but he's still not gotten rid of. Okay, so we're going to divide him over to that other side to move him over so that I've got my regular x squared plus 4x is equal to 1.5. Okay, now I can work my perfect square because I don't have to worry about that front end number. Okay, so my b is that 4, so 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4, so I'll be adding 4 to both sides this time. I'm going to go ahead and go straight into my perfect square here. So I know it's going to be x plus 2 squared is equal to 5.5. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 5.5. And then just subtract that 2. All right, our next one. Whoop. Okay, so we're going to move the 6 over. So I'm going to rewrite it with my x squared in front here. So my b is negative 8, so negative 8 divided by 2 squared. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4 squared. Negative 4 squared is 16, so I add 16 to both sides. I know this is going to be my perfect square, so x minus 4 squared. So I'm skipping a step again. 16 plus negative 6 is 10. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So I've got plus or minus 10, and then I add the 4. So x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, let's go ahead and add that 8. So I got 8 equals negative x squared minus 4x. I don't like when my x squared is negative, so we're going to take that out. Stick it in front so that it flips all the signs, and now we're going to just get rid of it. So we're going to divide him over to the other side, kind of like we did on that other problem that had the 2 in the front. So now it's a pretty x squared plus 4x. So my b is that 4. So 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So I'm adding 4 to both sides. Negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4. And then I've got my perfect square being x plus 2 squared. Opposite of squaring, square rooting. I cannot square root a negative. It will say error in my calculator because it will be an imaginary number. Okay, so this one we are saying is no solution. I do not have a real number that exists for it. Alright, we add the 1. So 1 equals x squared minus 6x. So negative 6 divided by 2 squared. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9, so I add 9 to both sides. So I've got 10 equals x minus 3 squared. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. We add that 3 to get 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, let's subtract the 9. I cannot get a perfect square trinomial with that 5 sitting there, so we're going to pull it out like a GCF. And divide them over. That decimal is negative 1.8. So now I've just got my normal x squared minus 2x, so that's my b. So negative 2 divided by 2 squared. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So I'm adding 1 to both sides. So I got negative 0.5 is equal to x minus 1 squared. Opposite of squaring. Cannot square root of negative again. So I got another no solution. Okay, my next one, we add 11. Got to get rid of that negative 4, so we're going to take him out like a GCF. Let him sit in front. Divide him over to the other side. That decimal is negative 2.75. So negative 4 divided by 2 squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4, so I'm adding 4 to both sides. So 1.25 is equal to x minus 2 squared. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So I've got plus or minus the square root of 1.25 is equal to x minus 2. Add the 2. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 1.25 is equal to x. My last one, subtract the 5. Get that 3 out. Get that 3 over. So 5 divided by 3 here. Negative 1.67. So negative 4 divided by 2 squared is negative 2 squared, which is 4. So I'm adding 4 to both sides. So 2.33 is equal to x minus 2 squared. Opposite squaring is square rooting. So plus or minus the square root of 2.33 is equal to x minus 2. Add the 2. X is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 2.33.